So how do you respond when what you see with your eyes doesn't align with what you know in your heart? How do you respond when you see the headlines out there and you see the evil and the suffering and pain in the world, and it just doesn't align with, well, the good God that you know, the loving God that you know, the merciful God that you know, the God that wants you to call him Father? But more than the pain and suffering out there, when that pain and suffering is attached to you, how do you respond? When that pain and suffering that leaves you reeling, leaves you questioning, leaves you paralyzed, how do you respond when what you see in your own life doesn't align with a good, loving, kind, merciful God that you call Father? For some of you, you walked away from God because of what you saw and what you knew. For some of you, you're thinking about walking away from God because of what you're seeing now. For some of you, there's so much tension in your spiritual journey right now because of what you see and what you know, and those two things aren't aligning for some of you. For some of you. It's why you're questioning God in the first place. And you see, we're in this series called Courageous Endurance, and we're just looking at a snapshot of the life of a guy named Habakkuk or Habakkuk. And you see, there's a book in the Old Testament, the ancient Jewish scriptures, by this name, but it's not really a book. It's a conversation, a really honest conversation between Habakkuk and God. But so many times, and maybe this is your framework around having a conversation with God, maybe this is how you were raised, but so many times when people think about having a conversation with God, there's this thought process, this feeling that you have to have some reverent type of conversation, some peaceful type of conversation, that if you're going to talk with God, you have to use a big churchy type of words, a holy type of words, that you have to be so careful with how you talk with God. But what we discovered, just having this sneak peek into this conversation between Habakkuk and God, it wasn't some warm and fuzzy, peace-filled, churchy type of conversation. No. That conversation, it's so much different. It was one of these toe-to-toe, spit, splattering, veins, bulging, words, spewing, silence, deafening, no holds barred conversation with God. Have you ever had one of those types of conversations with God? Maybe for you, you never thought you could because, again, you were raised in a context or went to some type of church framework where it's like, no, you can't talk with God like that because God is holy and reverent, and all of that's true. But what we discover is, Habakkuk doesn't hold back from the tension that he was feeling, the tension that he was staring at between what he was seeing with his eyes and what he knew in his heart. And you see, this conversation has a pretty simple rhythm. He starts with a complaint, Habakkuk's complaint to God. Then he waits and waits and waits some more, and then God finally responds. And this goes back and forth. And in part one, the first complaint that Habakkuk had was about Judah. Now, Judah was the two southern tribes. Israel, God's chosen people, were 12 tribes. And over a period of time, 10 of the tribes went north. They're called Israel, and then God sent in the Syrians and wiped them out. And now all that's remaining is 2 of the 12 tribes, which is Judah. And Habakkuk's complaint, because he was living in Judah, this was his complaint. He was like, why are you putting up with your chosen people, the 2 remaining tribes of Judah, who are choosing not to follow you? So Habakkuk just goes to God and says, hey, God, I don't understand. Your chosen people aren't following the Torah, your law, your framework on how to live life. And because they're not following that, they're completely morally depraved. Just their actions. Imagine the headlines. They wouldn't be much different than the headlines we read today. And not only are they just completely morally depraved, the leadership, the king, is leading all of your people away from you, God. So God, why are you putting up with your chosen people that are choosing not to follow you? And Habakkuk waits and waits and says, God. And finally, God responds, and God says, okay, I've heard you, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to send in Babylon to punish Judah. And then God described how evil and vile Babylon was. It's not like God didn't understand, didn't know. He's like, hey, Habakkuk, I'm going to send in Babylon, and they're really, really bad. And once Habakkuk hears this, guess what his next complaint is? Babylon? Seriously? Babylon? And so Habakkuk enters into his second toe-to-toe, spit splattering, veins bulging, words spewing, silence deafening, no holds barred conversation with God. And he goes, Lord, are you not from everlasting? And this word everlasting can mean for all eternity, but in Habakkuk's context, this word would have attached to when Israel was freed from captivity in Egypt, when God took his chosen people and said, I'm going to lead you to the promised land. This word everlasting has everything to do with freeing the Israelites, leading them to the promised land, establishing them as a mighty nation. He goes, hey, God, aren't you the one from everlasting? You brought your people out, your chosen people. And look, now there's only 2 of the 12 tribes remaining, and now you're saying you're going to send in the Babylonians. He goes on, my Holy One, meaning, God, you're perfect. Again, feel the tension within Habakkuk. He's like, hey, God, you're everlasting, you're perfect, you're holy, what I know about you. And then there's one simple word that's easy to overlook, and it's the word you. And something interesting over the period of time happened with this word you. You see, there's 18 times in the ancient Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament, where the ancient Jewish scribes, as they were translating their Bible, where they changed a word or a phrase. 18 of these. Now, maybe you were raised in a context where someone's saying to you, yeah, you can't believe the whole Bible because it's been changed over a period of time. Maybe in college, right? Some professor just rocked your kind of faith foundation because you trusted in the whole Bible, and all of a sudden a professor was shooting holes in it. Maybe right now you're like, oh, Chris, yeah, are you going to prove to me that the Bible's not infallible? No. You got to hold on to this, because once you start studying some of the changes, understand the why behind some of the changes, it starts to make sense. So there's 18 times where they call it scribal corrections. And you got to ask, why did the scribes, ancient scribes, make a change? Because what they did was they changed the word from you to we. Now, over the period of time, they changed it back. In the NIV, they changed it back to you. So why did they go from you to we? We will never die, right? It starts to change what Habakkuk said. Well, in these scribal corrections, the 18 of them, the scribes were so fearful to write anything that they thought would upset God. They were so fearful to disrespect God And their thought process in this one was they never wanted to attach an everlasting, eternal God with death. And their fear was so great that when they came to this one little word, they're like, oh, we can't write that. We got to change it to we. And that's so important because we got to understand that this wasn't some warm and fuzzy conversation that Habakkuk was having with God. The intensity of this conversation was so great that the ancient scribes were like, we can't even translate what he's saying because we don't want to offend God. And Habakkuk's like, hey, God, you are perfect and holy. And I know you will never die. And you, Lord, have appointed them, the Babylonians, to execute judgment. You can tell that he's trying to process this decision. And again, it's not aligning. It's not making sense. Like, wait a minute. God, you're appointing the evil, vile Babylonians to execute judgment. But God, you're my rock. You're the absolute power. You're the absolute strength. You're over all of it. So why do you need to use the evil, vile Babylonians when you're God? You've ordained them to punish? Again, God, this isn't making sense. I mean, Judah, what they're doing is bad, but the Babylonians are not just a little bit worse. They're as bad as they come. Habakkuk goes on, he says, hey, God, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You're perfect and holy, but why are you accepting the Babylonians, who are the definition of evil? And you cannot tolerate wrongdoing. And then Habakkuk gets into the why questions. He goes, why then? Why then? Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? And why then are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Have you asked the why questions? Are you asking why questions? God, why? God, I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. God, I don't understand why you're allowing to happen to me what's happening to me. God, I don't understand why I keep facing this. Habakkuk is like, God, I'm living in a morally deprived area with people that are not following you. And I'm coming to you and say, God, you got to do something. And your answer is to send in the vile, evil Babylonians? That doesn't make sense, God. And then Habakkuk uses this kind of fish illustration just to clearly paint the picture for God. He goes, hey, God, you've made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his nets. He gathers them up in his dragnet. He's painting this picture that the Babylonians are going to do to the people of Judah. They're just going to drag them all together in their nets. They have no hope of living. And they rejoice. God, they rejoice. The Babylonians are going to throw a party of their victory. The blood of Judah, God, your chosen people, the Babylonians are going to throw a party of epic proportions. Not only are they going to rejoice, God, hey, this is what else they're going to do. Their sacrifices to his net and burnt incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Habakkuk is like, hey, the spoils of war is going to be the riches of Judah. All of the hard work that the people of Judah is going to have earned, Babylon is just going to come in and they're just going to take it all. Take it all. And then Habakkuk says to God, he goes, Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? Again, he's Babylon. Habakkuk's like, is this really the plan? And I think what Habakkuk is getting at is a question that I think all of us at some point have asked. The question is, why do bad things happen to good people? I mean, that's really what Habakkuk's saying. Habakkuk's like, yeah, Judah's a little bit off kilter right now, God. They're doing some bad things, but at the core, they still love you, God. They're just a little bit off course. I mean, Babylon doesn't even care about you, God. I mean, have you felt this? Hey, God, I mean, I go to church and I pray sometimes. God, I give generously to the church and I feed the homeless and I serve people and I'm a good neighbor and I'm an engaged dad. I'm an engaged mom. Like I honor my wife. I honor my husband. God, I'm a good person. And why do you allow this to happen to me? And usually the next thought is, as you're saying to God, how good you are. Not perfect, right? But you're like, I'm trying, God. And then you start thinking about that person. But God, I mean, my neighbor, whoa. My boss, not even trying, God, not even trying to live a good life. Isn't that what we do? And then our faith journey collides with that moment where what we see and what we know doesn't align, and there's so much tension. And then we start looking at someone else's life and like, oh, look at them. They're not facing what I'm facing. Look at them. I mean, they're going to Disneyland. I can't even buy milk for my family. But God, I'm all in with you, and I can't, but they can. And back is just like, God, seriously? Like, seriously, this is what you're going to do. I come to you to say, God, you got to do something about Judah. Bring them back to you. Bring them back to you. And now Habakkuk is going to have to live through Babylon coming in. I mean, Habakkuk's part of Judah. He was going to face all of this wrath. And then Habakkuk says to God, hey, God, I'm going to stand at watch and station myself on the ramparts. The visual image is Habakkuk standing on a wall that's fortifying a city, looking out. He's like, I'm just going to stand, God. I'm going to watch, and I'm going to look to see what he will say to me and what answer I'm going to give to this complaint. See what Habakkuk said to God? He's like, I'm going to stand. I'm going to wait for you to reply. And God, I'm just going to tell you, whatever you reply to me with, I'm going to come back right at you. It's like Habakkuk is saying to God, okay, God, okay, I came to you. I waited. You responded. Now, what say you to my response, God? What say you? What say you? So Habakkuk waited. And waited some more, and waited some more. And then God finally responds. He goes, hey, Habakkuk, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. God's like, hey, Habakkuk, this isn't just for you. This is going to be for everyone. For this revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. What God was saying was, hey, there's going to be more waiting involved, Habakkuk, more waiting, but know that the end God was referring to was the end of Babylon. He's like, I'm going to use Babylon for a period of time for a very specific purpose, but guess what? Babylon is still going to come to an end, and guess what happened to Babylon? This mighty nation. It's a footnote of history. And though it lingered, Habakkuk is going to take longer than you would like. Habakkuk, I know in your mind you're going to have a time frame of what you think, how long it's going to take place. But Habakkuk, just know it's going to take so much longer than you want. Are you in one of those so much longer than you want seasons of life, saying, God, this is just, I can't keep going. No more, God. The timer is off. I can't keep going. And God is just saying, hey, this is going to take longer than you would like. So wait for it. Wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. You see, in God's first response, he was so clear of how evil Babylon was. Like he wasn't hiding the fact that he knew exactly what he was doing. And now God comes back at it with Habakkuk saying, hey, just remember, I know what I'm doing. He says to him, he goes, see, the enemy is puffed up. They're swelled up. His desires are not upright. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest. God's like, hey, hi, these Babylonians, they're all about themselves. They're all about themselves. I know who they are. I know what they're about. But sandwiched into this, God says something filled with so much hope. He said, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness, will live by faith. The righteous person, the person whose eyes are connected to God. The righteous, the person whose heart is positioned to say, God, I want to follow you. Will live by faith. By faith. And here's the thing with faith. Faith is the only thing will get you through when what you see with your eyes doesn't align with what you know in your heart. Faith is the only thing that will keep you walking in the footsteps of God. When what you see, the pain, the suffering in your life doesn't align with a good, loving, caring, merciful God who wants you to call him Father. Faith. To say, God, no matter what I see, I'm going to follow you. See, what we have to grasp, God's ultimate pursuit is for all people to pursue him. This is the storyline of the Bible. It's for all people to pursue, to follow, to have a relationship with God. When you grasp the significance of this and you lay that over every story, every moment of the Bible, how God orchestrated over time for all people to pursue him, to the point where God the Father placed his Son on a cross to suffer for all people to have the opportunity to pursue God. You see, when you hold on to that, it leads to this question. What if your suffering, your pain, leads to just one person to God? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? In part one, I showed this image. I said, this is every single person's spiritual journey. And I spent a lot of time on this first part of the journey. Maybe you find yourself at the very beginning and you're just asking the God questions, the Jesus questions. You're just not sure, but you're at the very beginning. And what happens over time, because God is pursuing everyone because he wants everyone to have a relationship with him. And the moment where someone names Jesus as Lord and Savior, it's a pinnacle moment. For those of you who've taken that step, I mean, I just tell you, it's a game changer in your life journey. But what happens to everyone is this life moment here, when what you see with your eyes doesn't align with what you know in your heart. And as soon as one of those moments crash into you, it gets you sailing into the valley. When we looked at in part one is, well, two things start to happen in the valley. There's waiting, there's always waiting, and it always takes longer than we want, doesn't it? And in the waiting is the wondering. It's all the why questions. I mean, we see this reflected in Habakkuk's conversation with God, but I know I have personally experienced this myself. The valley moments of waiting, and in the waiting, there's always the wondering, there's always the wondering. But there's one critical action, because you can't stay in the valley. You can't stay just waiting and just wondering. You have to go a direction. And here's the thing. If you don't get to this third action, you will wander away from God. And this is what happened to some of you. You just wandered away because the waiting and the wondering, and you never got to this third action. And this always leads to wandering away from God, running away from God. And that's why this third action is so critical. And this is what Habakkuk is doing. This is why this conversation, this toe-to-toe, spit splattering, veins bulging, words spewing, silence deafening, no holds barred conversation is so important to hold on to. Because what Habakkuk realizes, he was wrestling with God. I mean, holding on to him, saying, God, we got to figure this out. I'm not going to let you go. It's why he said, hey, God, hey, what say you? And I'm going to come back. Whatever you respond to me, just know, God, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back again. God, you and I together, I'm not letting go of this, because what I see with my eyes doesn't align with what I know about you, God. And God, I'm just going to keep wrestling with you and wrestling with you and wrestling with you. And it's in the wrestling that you'll start climbing out of the valley. But if you don't wrestle with God, I'm just telling you, you will wander away from him. I was born in 1973, and in the 1970s, I think the only two boy names that were ever given to boys in the 70s was Michael and Chris. And so I got the Chris name, and you know, like years and years later now, and if you're new parents, you know this, but now we're in this generation where parents, we like to give our kids like the strangest names with the weirdest spellings ever. And so both of my girls' names, Kiara and Claire, you know, are kind of in that genre, and which makes it difficult. If you've ever been on family vacation and you walk into one of those knick-knack type of shops where everything's junk, but as parents you find yourself buying things for your kids that you know is going to end up in your junk drawer, it's a great financial investment. Do you know, like, they have the racks of things like keychains with people's names on it? So our pursuit is always to try to find something with Kiara or Claire on it, and we just can never find it. And I finally told our girls, I'm like, it's just never going to happen. I mean, you can find Chris everywhere, but not Kiara. Like, it's just not going to happen. But right, for us, like, names just take on different meaning. But thousands of years ago, names were so highly important. It's why we see name changes throughout the storyline of the Bible. Abram went from Abram to Abraham. Simon went to change his name to Peter. Saul went to Paul. We see the name changes because names had so much significance back then. And you see, what we have to realize is, well, Habakkuk's name. Do you know what his name means? To wrestle. to embrace. If you're in the valley, you gotta wrestle. You gotta embrace. You got to. And trust me, God already knows the pain in your heart. What you're going to say to him out loud is not going to shock him. It's not going to surprise him. And you're not going to offend him. There's a guy named Horatio G. Spafford. Now that's a name. He was a successful attorney, businessman. He was married to Anna, and they had 5 kids, 4 girls and a boy. They were living in Chicago, and life was really good. Family was good, business was good, financially things were good. I mean, life was just in a great space until 1871. In 1871, Horatio and Anna lost their boy to pneumonia. And if you've ever lost a child, you know it changes you forever. Changes you. And in the midst of their grief of the loss of their son, the great Chicago fire erupted and devastated them financially, losing almost everything. When you think about a year like that, and some of you have had years like that, where you just thought it couldn't get worse, and it got worse. And Horatio knew that his family had to just get away for a period of time. They had to just get a season of renewal. And so he planned a trip for them to go across the pond to Europe. And on November 21st, 1873, Horatio helped Anna, his wife, and his 4 daughters to get on the French ship, the Ville du Havre. I know you're all impressed with my French. Horatio was supposed to be on that ship, but at the last minute, a business situation kind of came up, and so he put them on the ship and said, I'll meet you in England a few days later. Well, 4 days into the trip, the ship that Anna and their 4 daughters were on collided with another ship. And within 12 minutes, the ship sunk. Out of the 313 people on board, 226 of them died, including their 4 daughters. Anna made her way to England because of a ship passing by started picking people up. When she got to England, she wired her husband, and the beginning of this message was simply saved alone. What shall I do? A pastor who was also on board the ship and was saved shared a part of the conversation that he had with Anna after they were saved. And this pastor said that Anna looked at him and said to him, God gave me 4 daughters. Now they've been taken away from me. Someday, I will understand why. Well, Horatio, receiving this wired message, got on to the next ship to go be with his grieving wife. Approximately 4 days into the trip, the ship's captain called Horatio to his cabin, and the captain just wanted to let Horatio know that they're in the general proximity of where his daughters died. And Horatio, grieving the loss of his 4 daughters, started to write these words that God etched upon his heart. When peace, like a river, attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, is well with my soul. What if suffering, your suffering, is what God wants you to use to lead just one person to him? Would it be worth it? Because if Horatio G. Spafford was here today, and you would look at him in the eyes and say, Horatio, knowing how much hope these words have given to people, countless people, knowing how much peace that these words have given to people in some of the most chaotic of moments, knowing how much strength that these words have given to people when they had nothing left inside, knowing is it worth it? And I think Horatio would look you in the eyes and said, yes. Yes. God can take your suffering if you let him. Your suffering, your pain. To help other people walk to him, walk back to him. And when you see that happen, you start to grasp why a loving Father chose to let his Son die on a cross. You start to grasp how God can leverage suffering to breathe hope into the hopeless.